And from the TIA Now studios in Washington, D.C., it's time once again for the release of TIA's ICT market review and forecast, giving fresh data and comprehensive analysis for the ICT industry. Here to give us an overview is Arthur Gruen. He's principal author of the market review and forecast. And in our studio to my far left is Glenn Hunt. He's principal analyst at Current Analysis. And next to me is Ken Rabin. He's principal analyst at Yankee Group. And panelists, welcome to the program.
Great to be here.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Arthur, we appreciate you being in here from your remote location in upstate New York. Is that right?
That's right. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate it. We also appreciate your work on this year's TIA market review and forecast. Arthur, I'm going to start with you talking about, as we do typically around this time of the year, talking about the economic drivers that are driving the telecom industry and the technology industry for that matter. We have some data on this trend. I'm going to wait for my producer to put that data up, and if you can just walk us through that trend, please.
Okay. Basically, data is driving virtually all segments of the market. The most obvious one is data center construction. The big data is just putting enormous strains on businesses, and they're looking to expand their data capacity. So the data center construction is one of the faster growing areas. Cloud computing, not on the screen, is another rapidly growing area. In the internetworking section, we're looking at servers, gigabit Ethernet switches, which are driving that component. And on the data communication services, gigabit Ethernet and IP VPNs are rapidly growing segments. Basically, everything is revolving around how do you get faster data speeds.
So Glenn, of course, Arthur's talking about this incredible trend of the deluge, if you don't mind that word, of data traffic in the industry and also the consumer market. Of course, there's an endless number of technologies that are facilitating that data growth. What are some of those technologies and how are those helping reduce the cost for stakeholders in the industry?
Okay, great. That's really an excellent tie into Arthur's discussion. I think one of the key things behind a lot of this trend is the move to IP. So we do no longer have all the legacy technologies to deal with. We're dealing with IP. So that's where all the investment's going. So one of the things that we're seeing on the equipment side, with silicon investments and so forth, it's all oriented toward providing very high capacity, highly reliable IP communications. So I think that's one of the real underlying drivers here. So we're seeing situations where, in the past we were struggling with megabits of traffic. Now we're talking gigabits, tens of gigabits, 100 gigabits. So that whole problem seems to be well solved, and it's also very cost effective relative to what the equipment used to cost us. The second side of that is the cloud technologies. One of the things that we're seeing with the adoption of cloud technologies is, again, moving the cost points downward, making the technology much more available, and also providing us with the opportunity to really improve the velocity at which we bring in applications, which also then drives demand, because if you have an application you like, the demand builds for that application and so forth. And then the last part of it is with basic web technologies are available to everybody now. So, from a Microsoft-based PC, you have access to some fairly sophisticated applications, the ability to pull in data, do analysis, both on the consumer side as well as on the enterprise side. So I think those three things kind of create the perfect storm. We have the demand, which Arthur's been talking about. We have the technology to satisfy that demand, and I think the two just feed on each other and create that situation where it looks very promising from an infrastructure perspective, from an end user perspective.
Glenn, of course, you're here as our wireline analyst, if you don't mind that terminology. Ken, you're here as our wireless expert. Yeah. What are those technologies that are driving the telecom industry?
Yeah, so paralleling the fixed side, in the wireless domain, we have a push for speed. We have a push for capacity. Just unrelenting growth with subscribers and what they are doing with their networks. To shift metaphors, we're having Teutonic movement in terms of how people use networks, and that extends into the wireless domain as well. End users, be they enterprise or consumer, are now looking at being on networks regardless of where they are. And so we have technologies that are starting to enter into our networks today using LTE Advanced. So going from that initial rollout of LTE in some of the great networks around the United States, taking that to the next level where we can start to combine spectrum in interesting ways and get faster rates, and more importantly, we can accommodate more users, more capacity, more traffic to support the trend that Glenn was talking about, moving to the web, moving to the cloud, completely changing how businesses are tapping into their enterprise infrastructures. Wireless is a big part of that. Second aspect of this is when we start having these growth in capacity, we now start putting pressure on limited spectrum resources. It's very, very difficult to go to the government, regardless of which government it is, and ask them to free up more spectrum, take it to auction, assign that auction, the auction results, clear that spectrum, build out the network. It's a long process. One other approach to supporting the increase in capacity is to move to densification. Reduce the size of each of the cells. And so we have a lot of movement now to do just that in the hotspot areas. So very interesting changes that are shaping this future with wireless.
Arthur, if we can go back to you for a moment, I want to talk to you about, or ask you your input, get your input on carrier investment as they try to keep pace with this data growth.
Yeah, that's, for me, one of the more fascinating developments. If you go back a decade ago, 2003, 2004, the view was that there was enough capacity to last for the foreseeable future. This followed the huge investment in fiber in 2000, 99, 2000, and so on. Well, the foreseeable future lasted about 5 years. And several years ago, there are suddenly shortages of capacity, and this is the result of big data, video transmissions, consumers texting and sending videos and doing all kinds of things. So all of a sudden, there is these new applications were gobbling up bandwidth, and carriers now have to go and reinvest. So that's a real turnaround from a decade ago, where the view of the industry was quite different. But picking up on what was just said, because of this enormous growth in data demand, you need to be able to have enough bandwidth to transmit that data. Speed is of the essence, and you need the backhaul. You need both on the wireline and the wireless side to be able to accommodate this huge annual growth in data traffic. And so the carriers are investing. They've already invested a lot, and they're continuing to invest to keep up the pace. And that's one of the drivers of the industry going forward. Overall, is that there has been steady spending levels in infrastructure, and that's supporting the industry going forward.
Ken, as you know, the wireless market is transitioning from a voice-centric service to a data-centric service. Has that transition already occurred for the most part, would you say?
Well, it's an ongoing process. Voice will never go away. There will always be girlfriends who want to call their boyfriends, or the voice will always be a component. But what we're seeing in our research is definitely a shift away from the traditional voice and, interestingly enough, text messaging types of traffic on the network, and moving more towards an emphasis on data. So working with social media, using all over-the-top applications such as WhatsApp to link with friends, Twitter as an example. The other aspect is video. We're seeing people using video for fun over the internet. And some of the tariff plans that are out there make it possible to do that and not completely strip out your accounts, as well as Wi-Fi availability is quite strong. So, voice as a proportion of the traffic is starting to dwindle, but our operators are quite smart about pricing their plans. So I think, at least in this country, we've figured out how to pay for our networks, even as that shift is occurring in the consumers.
Arthur, the demand for big data is also encouraging spending and investment in cloud technologies. What is the trend there as far as cloud goes?
Well, Most companies, certainly all small companies, or virtually all small companies, can't afford to have the computing capacity, this multiple servers, and the internal resources to manage all that. And even some large companies either don't have the resources or don't want to allocate a lot of their internal expertise and assets to just supporting these just computing power. So what they're doing is moving it to the cloud, and what the cloud does is allow small companies to just sort of rent computing capacity, if you will. It's not quite that simple, but basically it comes down to that. And with providers having servers that can support multiple clients, you get a more efficient use of the computing space. So the same computing capacity can serve many more companies than can be done with a single company. So what you have is that companies are basically outsourcing, and this is a trend throughout the economy, but in this context, outsourcing their data demands to the cloud, both small businesses and even many large businesses. And so what you're getting is huge growth in cloud computing, and this saves money for customer premises equipment and allows small companies to look like big companies in terms of the types of services they can provide to their customers. So cloud computing is going to be has been and will continue to be one of the fastest growing segments, not only of telecommunications, but of the economy as a whole.
Glenn, we're going to get to this a little bit later in the show, but I want to talk about the spending and investment by the enterprise companies, small and medium-sized businesses, and also the big players out there. How is the need for more bandwidth driving the spending and investment with the enterprise?
Well, I think as Arthur indicated or alluded to, there's a shift between investing in on-premise equipment and the staff associated with that to moving to the cloud. And the key to making that all work is a solid communications infrastructure that has to be priced appropriately, as well as highly reliable and resilient. So I think that one of the things we're seeing as a trend, a lot of that spend is not reducing, it's going toward cloud services. It's going toward providing access to applications that the enterprise can run their businesses on, such as ubiquitous access to Salesforce.com, for example, the ability to support not only remote users but distributed users, so that the staffs are highly distributed, therefore putting a demand on that infrastructure to provide that capability. So I think one of the key things that we see is when we talk to service providers and vendors, we see a need to provide enterprise services, but do that much more cost effectively. So we put less intelligent enterprise equipment on the premise, but it's backed up by intelligence in the cloud and the access to many new applications. The application velocity, where applications are being added to the repertoire for the enterprises to use, is just growing phenomenally. Just as the bandwidth is growing, so is the choice in applications and the variety of applications that can be custom tailored to that enterprise. So those trends, I think, are pretty ubiquitous across the industry.
Arthur, which industry sectors are experiencing the highest percentage of growth as spending on cloud and M2M technologies are almost doubling through 2017, while cyber also has healthy growth?
Yeah, we're talking a lot about clouds. The companies have to manage the explosive growth in data. At the same time, they want to keep their infrastructure costs, their internal infrastructure costs in check. And so this is pushing the spend from internal to external and to the cloud. So you're seeing the cloud just growing, cloud services growing explosively the past few years, and it's going to continue to grow explosively. I don't see, at least in the near term, any slowdown in the demand for data. In fact, big data is just spewing out new applications that seem to crop up every other day. And there are more things that companies can do, and they need the cloud to do it. With respect to MTM, mobile to mobile, it's low-cost sensors are allowing communication from machine to machine in virtually any type of hardware. And so you're seeing connected car, you're seeing that, if you're in an accident, it automatically calls for help. In healthcare, tracking energy consumption, there are all sorts of applications there. And the reference before was to applications sort of evolving ubiquitously, and we're going to expect to see new apps in the M2M space just coming up as more things can be counted, more things can be measured, and you can do more things with that information. So that's really growing very rapidly. Cybersecurity is sort of an outgrowth of this. It's that the more data that you're transmitting, and especially if you're transmitting it to the cloud, and you need that secure transmission, there's a greater incentive for both other companies and other governments to hack into that data. So one thing goes hand in hand with the other. The growth in data is generating growth in spending on cybersecurity to protect that data. And that's both on the private enterprise side and in the government side. And in this country, it's probably about a 50-50 split between those two in terms of the concern that cybersecurity is generating. So those are really the three dramatically growing sectors of the telecom industry.
That was a great explanation, Arthur. And just for our viewers, so we can illustrate your points, I'm going to go to a chart on the growth and investment in M2M cloud and cybersecurity. If you can quickly walk us through that.
I guess the cloud is in the yellow bar there. It's we expect that to grow to over 100 billion by 2017 from about 56 billion. These bars are sort of a dramatic way of showing the growth. The M2M, because it's a smaller bar, it tends to get undercut here. But actually, on a percentage basis, it's growing very rapidly as new applications emerge and as more hardware gets installed with sensors so you can measure stuff. And so there's the utilities are using this, healthcare is using it. It used to be pretty much a vehicle-based business, but now it's just moving beyond that. So expect that to grow to more than 20 billion. It's about 25 billion by 2017. And the cybersecurity, it's already a fairly big component of the market, but is going to be increasing. We expect that to get to more than 60 billion by 2017. These are big numbers for areas that, if you go back to 2009, were relatively minor segments of the market. So you can see pretty dramatically, especially on the cloud computing bar, how fast that's growing and how big it is, just in sheer volume. There's a lot of resources going into these three segments of the market. And I believe this chart illustrates that pretty nicely.
Glenn, Arthur mentioned sensors as being a technology driver for M2M, IoT, and some other verticals and sectors out there. How would this technology, as far as these inexpensive sensors, have an impact on something like a power grid?
Well, I think the whole issue behind the M2M is, again, goes back to reliability, cost effectiveness. We've always wanted to monitor all the critical infrastructure that we've had for many, many years. But the problem comes about, and it was too costly to do that. So we didn't have the technology at the location, which relates to your point about the low-cost sensors. So we need not only the ability to sense things, but we also need the ability to process that information and transmit it. So I think that's the key part of that, is that the technology now is in place to support that effectively.
Ken, sensors effect?
So I guess I have a somewhat more jaundiced view about sensors and the wireless space. The amount of data that sensors transmit typically is fairly limited. What gets to be a little bit more interesting is just the number of sensors that potentially come into existence. And a significant amount of traffic today actually can occur just with the signaling. Setting up a connection, tearing it down, and that causes a lot of processing in the base stations and in the network and the core network in the cloud. And so it's probably that knock-on effect of having the sensors working more so than having raw volumes of data being pumped out of the sensor type networks. To the extent that video is integrated into sensors, that could drive some data flow. But my suspicion is it's going to be that signaling overhead of setting up a short connection and then tearing it down, setting up, tearing it down, that could make some interesting challenges in the signaling infrastructure.
Ken, I want to move now into your turf, if you will, wireless proliferation into our industry, into the consumer market.
Into our very lives.
Into our very lives. Thank you for being dramatic. If you didn't do it, I would have. Tell us about some of the technology drivers, and we also have a chart. When you're done, we have a chart. We're going to put that up for our viewers, and you can go through that as well.
Lovely. Okay, so it comes down to what we talked about at the beginning: capacity. People are really starting to use. They have been since 2007 with the advent of the iPhone, the smartphone, on the network, driving data traffic. The trends suggest this is going to continue for a while. It may taper off because, after all, how much video can each individual person consume 24 hours a day? There are probably some limits there. But for now, the growth appears to be pretty solid. And the saturation, I think we'll see it, it's in our charts, we'll see that the consumers are starting to saturate the market in terms of their subscribers. But how do you accommodate that growth? How do you accommodate that capacity? And it will come down to new spectrum. New spectrum translates into new spectrum bands that the equipment has to support. And so that can trigger refreshes of older network equipment because operators, the large service providers, may have to go back into their networks and add radio equipment that's specifically tuned to the frequencies that are added through the auction process. In addition to that, the backhaul. We have to be able to pull this traffic from the sites that are around the nation, possibly even from rural areas where backhaul has traditionally not been great. So we have to deal with the capacity, sending over the IP routers and through the optical infrastructure that we have. And then, lastly, densification, trying to reduce the size of the cells in our urban areas so we can lift the traffic capacity that's available in the system. So I think those will be the primary technology drivers in the near future.
Ken, as I mentioned, we have an illustration in the MRNF 2014 on wireless subscriber growth in the U.S. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, I think you can see it's not a terribly sharp curve. It's we're starting to make sure that every person in our country has a mobile phone. Now even our children are having it, sometimes at very young ages. So you can see the growth starting to taper off. We're not on a large slant up. What gets a little bit more interesting is how people are using their mobiles, and that goes to video making its way into the networks increasingly. The web traffic, enterprises shifting so much operational activity into the cloud has a huge impact in terms of how the wireless networks are operating.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think we've demonstrated that there's a lot of synergies between the wireless and the fixed line network. And this is definitely one of those areas where we want to have seamless exchange between how that data is being transmitted, whether it's going over the wireless network or whether it's beginning on the wireless network and then transitioning to the fixed. So wireless hotspots have been around for many, many years, but the key now is to make that seamless from the user perspective. So you don't really know or care, unless you're concerned about security, that your traffic is going over a fixed line network at the local Starbucks, for example. So I think there's going to be a tremendous, and this ties nicely into Arthur's discussion on cybersecurity. That security needs to be at the device, at the hotspot, at the CO, all the way back into the core, into the cloud. So I think in the past we've seen sort of bolt-ons for security. We'll put a firewall here if we need it. I think that security architecture is changing very radically, and it's got to begin at the source to the destination. Well, otherwise, we'll have to have the security breaches and so forth that we don't want to see.
Ken, I want to talk about 5G and the proliferation of 5G, those conversations that we're already having.
Let the hype begin.
The hype, well, I wanted to ask you about that. Where are we on that hype cycle? And how is that encouraging wireless to move a little bit faster?
Yeah, so it's fascinating to watch because I think the operators are still trying to get their hands around how do we get our networks today to work at their very best. And by the way, LTE is actually a couple of words put together into an acronym. Long-term evolution. There's a path. We can actually add more speeds, more capacity with LTE today. We have LTE Advanced only now making its way out into the markets. There's further evolution that can occur on that LTE spectrum. However, when you look forward and you look past 2020, you start to envision possibly having important changes in the way wireless networks operate, especially if you look at the transportation segment and possibly a future of autonomous vehicles, driverless vehicles. I would have loved to have been able to come down the GW Parkway this morning in an autonomous vehicle reading your website the entire way down. Right now I can go to jail for that. So after 2020, we may have very different networks, and it may not just be the service providers that are delivering the entire network. Perhaps we'll see different types of networks collaborating together in interesting ways. This takes a different set of standards that will need to be backwards compatible with what we have today. And to get to that point, we need to understand what our requirements are. We need to understand what the technology is capable of. So there's tremendous amount of effort going into the process of defining the requirements. We have organizations around the world. We've got METIS in Europe. We have the 5G PPP that is working on that as well. And we also have some Asian nations that are raising the ante and pushing this very hard, to a certain extent out of national pride, and to perhaps set the stage for the companies that are on their soil to be the leaders of the next wave of wireless technology, much as Europe was really the tip of the sword when it came to GSM back in the day. So if you look at the next several years, and I'm talking about before 2020, there are major sporting events that will be occurring in Asia, with the Olympics in Japan and Korea. Those will be milestones on the path to 5G. I think we'll see some early, and we've already had announcements actually, of the goal to have 5G demonstrations at those events. So the race is on.
Well, Arthur, and I'd like to refer, by the way, to a bar graph in the MRNF 2014 when I asked you this question. So to my producer, if you can go ahead and put that up on wireless and wireline infrastructure spending. Thank you. Okay. Arthur, so as I mentioned, wireless and wireline infrastructure spending will be virtually even by 2017. Can you explain this trend?
Yeah, I mean, historically, wireline infrastructure spending was always higher than the wireless component, in large part because it's just more expensive to lay wire and connect and do an actual physical connection, digging up the ground or putting it overhead, whatever. Also, fixed broadband emerged much earlier than wireless broadband, so basically the wireline infrastructure had a long head start, both in terms of just simple availability of technology and morphing into broadband and just the cost. More recently, however, as this focus of this whole webinar has been on, is the enormous growth in wireless data. And wireless data means not only LTE Advanced, but you have to keep up with the pace here. It's one thing to, typically in an infrastructure spend, you create the infrastructure and then you have it, so you don't have to recreate it each year. It's not like producing a product and selling it, then you have to produce the next product and sell it. Once you have the infrastructure, you have it. So typically, after you have a surge in spending, you typically see a decline. We're not seeing that in this cycle. We're seeing a slower growth, but the level of spending is being maintained because to accommodate this enormous growth in traffic. So the carriers have to upgrade their base stations, maintain their facilities. They have to keep trying to add LTE to more locations. The basic LTE is largely built out, but the next step is to push that forward. Even before we get to the 5G area, we're looking at LTE Advanced and faster LTE. LTE is sort of as was indicated earlier, it's a path, and there's a lot of it is based on economics. How much do you want to provide, and how much can you charge for it? And the enormous demand for data among wireless users. Basically, your wireless phone is your entertainment center, and you also use it to make calls every now and then, but it's basically a computer that provides all kinds of entertainment functions. And they're charging for that now. They're providing unlimited voice and text, and now charging for gigabits of monthly data usage. So the pricing is evolving to the point where you can offer faster speeds at higher prices, and it looks like people will be willing to pay for it. But in order to get there, you have to have the capacity to provide those speeds and to provide that bandwidth. And so the carriers are keeping pace with their spending, and so we're seeing wireless growing faster than wireline, and pretty soon they'll be pretty much equal by 2017 is what we are projecting.
Glenn, as you know, sorry, did you want to comment on that?
I was just going to say, one of the things that we see from the carriers is they're looking at that 5 to 7 year horizon. So the equipment they're installing into the network can give them that smooth, a much smoother evolution to higher capacities and higher speeds, because we don't want that step functions we've seen in the past where you build a network, then you wait for demand. Well, it's sort of flipped around now. We have demand and we have to build a network to meet it. But we know that as soon as we meet that demand, there's going to be more behind it. So one of the things we're seeing with, certainly with routing technology, switching technology, is the ability to expand that fairly seamlessly by adding port cards, by adding additional capacity, without going out and ripping the infrastructure out and then going into another wholesale build. And I think that's a real key point that, and it certainly comes through in Arthur's charts, that that spending is going to be contiguous through at least till 2017, and we're going to see that both on the wireless side and the wireline side.
Glenn, of course, we've only scratched the surface of big data as we move into our next topic. Predictive analytics is something that people are talking about, not only in theory, in practice as well. How can you leverage, or how can enterprise and service providers leverage predictive analytics in order to improve their bottom line and also quality of service and customer service?
Yeah, I think those are really key points. I think one of the things that service providers for years have wanted to know more about how their networks are being used. You know, we had the OTT threat here a few years back where everyone was concerned about the OTTs getting all the revenue. So I think there's a clear case where if the operator can tap into the parameters of usage, so if he knows what the trends are, where the usage is coming from, what the habits are on a predictable basis, all by using big data analytics, then they can plan better. They can also come up with creative services. They see that X application is being used a lot in their network. Well, maybe they want to make an arrangement with the provider of that application to give it superior service. So it's no longer a threat, it's an opportunity for service providers to actually engage in that revenue stream. So I think there's a lot of stuff happening there. Certainly the infrastructure plays a big role there in the ability to collect that data. Much like we talked about the sensors, the cost to do that is much lower now today, so we can collect more information. I think the same thing applies here. We now have the ability with the analytical tools to actually make some real beneficial use out of the information we collect.
On the wireless front, there's been remarkable change in the technologies that have been deployed out in the field to feed information back to the service providers, to tell them how their network is running. In the old days of wireless, you almost had to look at the billing stream to figure out, is our network working well? With LTE, and retrofitted to a certain extent into the 3G platforms as well, is a constant flow of information about the connections, the quality, eliminating the need largely to do drive tests anymore, because now the customer's devices are flowing information back through the network. And there are companies that today have put in place systems to absorb this information and provide the platforms to understand it, to help the operators drive really outstanding customer experience in a quantifiable way, in a proactive way. So big changes in how the service providers actually can keep tabs on the quality environment.
Arthur, I want to go back to you. The enterprise sector will have better growth than prior years, and also spending on services that support enterprises, networks, and customer premises equipment will also have growth. Can you explain this trend?
Yeah, a large part of it is the economy. The 2009 so-called Great Recession really stung businesses. They were the precipitous drop in demand almost across the board led to companies being a little wary about investing in more capacity if the capacity that they had currently they couldn't sell. This is now looking at the enterprises. You don't want to invest to produce more if you can't sell what you got. So, and it takes a while for companies to get a little more comfortable with the economy and being able to look forward and focus on growth rather than focus on what can I do to save costs. And so we're seeing that transition in the telecom area, that both at the enterprise level, companies are now shifting their focus from reducing cost to promoting growth, because there's a little more comfort now that the economy is on an expansion path, and we expect that faster economic growth over the next 4 years compared with the last 4 years will lead to higher profits, and it's more than profits. It's the willingness to use those profits to invest in capacity, and you only do that if you think that capacity will be used. So we're seeing that transition now, and this is being manifest in some of the things we've already talked about: the data center, the web servers, the network management, network security. Also, contact centers, another area of growth. The market is very competitive, and one of the differentiators is customer service. So companies are putting a lot more emphasis and resources into their contact centers to provide a better customer experience, to more quickly deal with customer complaints and convert complaints into upselling opportunities if they can, or at least try to retain their customers, because there are a lot of other companies there who want to snatch them away. So contact center areas, I wouldn't say it's one of the faster growing segments of the market per se, but it's an improving growth area compared with the past few years. Similarly, with the Ethernet switches and the things that we've already talked about in terms of data, that's going to be fueling growth, and that's a bigger component of the market. While the traditional sectors, PBXs, key systems, and the voice areas are, that's not where you're going to see the growth going forward. It's mostly data, increased spending on the data capacity, and also an improved economy, which makes companies more willing to spend on increasing capacity.
Arthur, once again, to illustrate your data in the MRNF 2014 for our audience, let's go ahead and put up the telecommunications spending by component in the U.S. If you could just briefly walk us through that, as I know you just gave us an explanation.
Okay. Unified communications. Yeah, I want to. That was companies were a little leery about that in the last few years, so we didn't see too much growth. That was maybe hyped, maybe overhyped technology. It was hard to see an immediate. When you're focusing on reducing costs, you don't want to invest in something which may have some productivity gains down the road, but it's not going to show up in the next quarter. And when the economy is weak and you're having trouble selling products, that's a concern. Now that there is more of a focus on a long-term growth path, productivity gains are now gaining popularity, and so we're looking for unified communications to be a growing area. Many of these other things we've already discussed: the cloud computing, the M2M, and the cybersecurity are rapidly growing. Web conferencing, I guess this perhaps is what we're doing right now. It's a great productivity gain. It allows me to save on travel costs and time by being able to do this webinar from a remote location. And this is being used by companies all the time, both internally, largely internally, but sometimes externally as well, to communicate and share, and be able to even share spreadsheets and documents and so on. So you can have inputs where people have access to their own files, and you save on travel, and you just basically you're able to do things more quickly. You can set up a conference in a short period of time, and just the turnaround time gets faster. In an economy which is very competitive and where the focus is on looking to gain market share in a growing area, companies are more willing to spend on these areas. In terms of services and support of these technologies, when you're spending more, you need more support. It's the expertise that you have to get, and not all companies have the expertise in-house. And the technologies are changing so rapidly that you need to. A lot of this is being increasingly outsourced because you need people who are abreast of what the latest developments are, what the latest products are, where the best opportunities are, so that they can be customized to an individual company's needs. So you're getting growth in services and supportive equipment that goes hand in hand with growth in spending on that equipment. The audio conferencing, video conferencing, audio conferencing is a steady market. We not looking for too much there. Video conferencing got a big boost during the recession because it was a great way to save on travel time and costs. Now it's less pressing when the economic conditions are a bit better. So we are looking for less growth in video conferencing equipment than we had in the past, but more growth in these other sectors.
Arthur, I want to ask you about growth in telecom in the U.S. compared to overseas. Spending in the U.S. is higher than internationally. It's roughly about 6% growth. Internationally, it's about 4.5%. What are some of the factors surrounding this growth? And I'll ask my producer to put up a couple of bar graphs, one for the U.S. and one for international, and you can walk us through that as well.
Historically, up until 2013, international was growing very steadily, faster than the U.S. market. And you look back year by year, and I've been doing this since the mid-90s, and that's pretty much been the case. 2013 was a flip, and the basic reason for that flip, the U.S. growing faster than the international markets, was a slowdown in Europe and also in Canada. Europe economy has been noticeably weaker than the rest of the world. Even the U.S. economy, which is perhaps nothing to write home about in terms of its growth, has been doing a lot better than Western Europe. Russia's having some economic problems as well these days, and Eastern Europe. So at the same time, the wireless market, which has been a huge driver both domestically and internationally, is pretty much tapped out in Europe. We're talking about saturation in the U.S. Penetration in the U.S. is about 105% in 2013, which sounds like a lot. Some people have more than one subscriptions. In Europe, it is 130%. So we're not even getting close to that, and I don't expect that we will. But there's not going to be much growth in the wireless sector, which had been a big driver going forward. And Canada, the wireless market's actually dipped a bit as prices have come down, and landline spending is pretty much flattered down in most of the developed countries anyway. If you sort of strip out Europe and Canada and you look at the rest of the world, Middle East, Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America are still growing at very healthy rates. So, but when you throw in Europe, which is a slow-growing area that's in large part reaching saturation, both in wireless and approaching it in fixed broadband, we don't expect rapid growth in that area going forward. We expect the economy, while improving there as well, but still to remain much weaker than the U.S. and the rest of the world. We look for a bit of a turnaround in Canada, but that's also a mature market that we don't expect to grow. One thing that may skew the numbers a bit, we don't have breakouts for some of the rapidly growing areas in the U.S. like cloud computing and M2M. So some of the real growth drivers that we're seeing in the U.S., we don't have enough data to track internationally. Even so, the U.S. is becoming a much more dynamic area in 2013, and we expect growing going forward. And we still expect dynamic growth in most of the rest of the world, but not in Europe or Canada.
Glenn and Ken, I'd like to get your comments on growth internationally, wireline and wireless. We have a couple of charts for our viewers once again in the wireline sector. Glenn, I'll start with you. If you can go ahead and put one of those two up. Now, of course, this is focusing on the Middle East area, but a tremendous amount of growth in the Middle East, by the way. Do you think that U.S. investment in that region is keeping pace with the growth?
Yeah, I think that's really an interesting question. When we look at the market in general, it's a very global market. A lot of the same players are involved in all facets of the market. You know, you have the big telecom vendors, you have the operators, especially the big operators in the U.S. are also international operators. So I think there is a big investment on a global basis by all the parties involved, and I think that'll continue. One of the things that we've seen, since the technology is sort of ubiquitous across most of the regions, you know, if you're buying an LTE base station, you're going to have pretty much the same technology, maybe different frequencies, but you're going to have the same technology that you have in the U.S. So I think just the fact that the technology can be used on a much broader geographical basis really enables these vendors and operators to work on a global basis. So I think that investment's there.
Can wireless in the Middle East keeping pace with their demand out there?
Yeah, but if the question is, are U.S. companies leveraging that growth? In the wireless sector, that answer is a bit challenging. We have very strong competition from very capable Chinese suppliers. We also have a Samsung, which is well known for its handset business, is expanding in the network infrastructure. Something which is relatively recent, you know, outside of Korea. In Korea, they've been very strong, but they've got very capable TD, LTE base station solutions, and they aim to take that to a broader global market. But if you step back and you look at how the landscape has changed in terms of wireless equipment suppliers, and I'm talking about the air interface, not the IP routing. I mean, we've got some very good American companies that bring products for IP routing to market. In the wireless domain, this is now the province of companies that are outside the U.S. Certainly a lot of U.S. employees located in our country, coming out of the Lucent, the fabled Lucent, the fabled Motorola, up in Canada, the Nortel expertise. This all still exists, but it's now wrapped into Ericsson, into Nokia, into Alcatel-Lucent. These are the companies that are doing battle to gain market share in the Mideast, but they are facing formidable, very excellent competitors coming from the other side of the world.
Ken, Glenn, and Arthur, there are 350 plus pages of data and analysis in the 2014 Market Review and Forecast. We can certainly spend the rest of the day today talking about that, but we're not going to do that. If you want to get your hands on the Market Review and Forecast, when I close that, I'll tell you how. But before I do that, I want to thank both of you for being in our studio today and taking time out of your day.
This was lovely. Thank you for having us.
We appreciate it. And Arthur, of course, once again, thank you for coming in remotely from your office in New York.
Always a pleasure to report on the industry and happy to join you in this webinar.
And if you'd like to get your copy of TIA's ICT Market Review and Forecast, please log on to tiaonline.org and click on Resources and then click on Market Forecast. So long.